Welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is RecChat, your AI Guideline Repository Assistant. My name is Kirsty Watson, and I'm the Business Developer Lead here at Evidence Prime, and I'll be the host of today's webinar. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to attend this webinar. I'd like to get started by introducing today's speakers. So firstly, we have Justina Linska, the project manager at Evidence Prime. Also from our team, we have Arthur Novak, the CTO and co-founder of Evidence Prime. And we also have a special guest joining us today, Ashley Mutali, a public health specialist at Cochrane Calendar. I'll now pass it over to Ashley, who will tell us more about the eCOVID recommendations.
All right, thanks, Christy. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen. I'm really excited to introduce you today to the Rec Map and some of the knowledge mobilization activities that we did with the Rec Map. So to begin with, during the pandemic, we saw an extremely large increase in research and recommendations being published. And this was all being disseminated through multiple channels of communication. So instead of turning to these multiple sources for COVID-19 recommendations, where often there's potential for lots of noise, we developed the Rec Map as a one-stop shop for COVID-19 recommendations. So what is the COVID-19 Rec Map? The Rec Map is a digital tool that organizes clinical, public health, and health policy recommendations from different guidelines on COVID-19 all in one place. Not only does it host the recommendation, but it displays the information about that recommendation, linking you to the guideline, giving you the judgments that were made for that recommendation, and other recommendation and guideline information. Some features about the Rec Map is that it's easy to navigate, it's living, which means we're updating our Rec Map based on the latest recommendation updates, and it's freely accessible at covid19.recmap.org. Our team also critically appraises the guidelines using the Agreed To tool, and we have a really neat feature where you can request to contextualize recommendations with our team. So how can you use the Rec Map? So you can search for recommendations on the Rec Map in two different views. So you can search within a list view, which will populate all recommendations in a list format. And we also have the map view, which allows you to find COVID-19 recommendations based on your population of interest and also your intervention of interest. In these two views, you can use the search bar to type in keywords to find recommendations based on your topic of interest. And you can also use filters to narrow your search results and sift through recommendations based on the source, year, age, world region, and so on. So what happens when you click on a recommendation? So once you click on a recommendation, you'll be taken to the recommendation page, and this will provide you with further recommendation details and the guideline that it comes from. So you get information on the following items: the type of statement, the original recommendation statement, the recommendation strength and the certainty of the evidence, the critical appraisal score, also known as the Agreed To score in the box to the right, a button that allows you to request to contextualize recommendations or a development. We also provide you with other recommendation details in the white box related to the population and intervention details. And at the bottom, we have other interactive tabs that will show you more recommendation details, such as implementation considerations, evidence to decision tables, and links to plain language recommendations. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. So another component of the Rec Map is our plain language recommendations, or plain language versions of recommendations. And this is where we take the original recommendation that may oftentimes contain scientific jargon and complex language, and we develop a summary of that recommendation in plain language. So by definition, plain language recommendations, or we call them PLRs, they're an easy to understand summary of an up-to-date recommendation from organizations like the WHO and the CDC. And some of the benefits about PLRs is that it clearly informs patients about the benefits and harms of an intervention. It's designed to promote self-care, and it can prepare you for a visit with a healthcare professional. So how does the RecMap operate? So we have many different team members working on different aspects of the RecMap to get this up and running. And this is just a brief overview of what happens. So first we have to search for the guidelines. So we have the Health Information Research Unit at McMaster University in Canada, who conducts regular pre-filtered PubMed searches. And in parallel, we conduct weekly and monthly searches for COVID-19 guidelines and recommendations from the sources listed here. Once we retrieve those citations, we then screen the articles using specific inclusion criteria. So one is, does the methodology follow a guideline? And number two, is the population related to COVID-19 suspected, confirmed, or high-risk people? So once we screen the guidelines and select them for inclusion, the guidelines get critically appraised. So we have 2 trained members of the research team that uses the agreed to instrument to critically appraise the included guidelines. And on our map, we only report 3 domains from the agreed to tool. One is the scope and purpose, the rigor of development, and editorial independence. Afterwards, data from the guideline and the recommendation gets extracted in GradePro. And we're extracting information on the guideline level and the recommendation level. This information is then published to the RecMap using the GradePro software. And once recommendations are published, we explore the RecMap for priority recommendations to develop a plain language recommendation. And that also gets uploaded to the RecMap using GradePro. So where are we now? Since the launch of the RecMap in 2020, we have screened over 6,000 citations, extracted over 759 guidelines, 10,361 recommendations, and we've also developed 133 PLRs. Also, so far, we've collaborated with 177 researchers from over 40 institutions, and the work from the RecMap has also been awarded twice. So given the success, over the past year, we really wanted to focus on how can we actually increase the awareness, use, and engagement of the RecMap. So from June 2022 to 2023, we focused on knowledge mobilization. And what does that mean to us? Well, it refers to strategies that make evidence accessible, useful, understandable for our knowledge users and audience. And Research Impact Canada states it the best way, because it's really about getting the right information to the right people in the right format at the right time. And a key part of doing this is through co-production and co-design, which to us means bringing together various stakeholders and meaningfully engaging with our RecMap end users to make the adoption and the application of the RecMap more likely. So our first step was really for knowledge mobilization was to identify our target audience, project partners, and knowledge mobilization needs. So for our target audience, we identified 10 different groups that we wanted to engage with, but also would benefit the most from the RecMap. So this included community leaders working with migrants and refugees, public health professionals, Indigenous peoples, clinicians, parents, policymakers, and media, as well as professionals working with marginalized public, non-digital public, Cochrane authors, and guideline developers. So as you can see, our focus was on the Canadian context because this project was supported by the Canadian Institute of Health Research, but also globally in order to learn from our international partners and apply lessons learned locally here in Canada. And we also needed to identify experts to coordinate the KM activities for each group. So we leveraged our vast network of RecMap relationships and invited KM leads that had connections to each audience to lead activities. And having the connection to these audiences ultimately contributed to the success of our KM project. So what kind of activities did we conduct as part of knowledge mobilization for the RecMap? So from October 2022 to May 2023, we conducted various activities. So one was unidirectional activities, which mostly relates to the dissemination of the RecMap, where information is flowing in one way. So examples of this included webinars, outreach activities, advertisements, press releases, storytelling events. And then we also conducted bidirectional activities where information is flowing in 2 ways between the researcher and the knowledge user, and acts as a good way to obtain feedback about the RecMap, including what are the barriers and facilitators to using the RecMap. So examples of that includes interviews, workshops, and consultations. We also conducted engagement and implementation activities where our leads worked closely with our team to integrate RecMap elements with their organization's website. And our project team had also done a few KM activities with a broader target audience, such as usability testing with the RecMap, and also a deliberative dialogue to showcase the results from all these activities and for our stakeholders to hear, respond to, and build off of each other's input. So I'd like to share some preliminary results with you of the feedback that we received from some of these activities, mainly the usability testing and the deliberative dialogue. So for the facilitators, the digital public that conducted the usability testing believed that the RecMap offered various ways to view the recommendation information. They liked the search and filter functions of the RecMap. They liked the way that the design supported the content, and also liked that everything was in one place. Likewise, when we had the deliberative dialogue with healthcare professionals and the public, they favored the simple layout of our plain language recommendations. They liked the usefulness of the RecMap as a point of care tool. And they liked they thought that the RecMap would be beneficial for other diseases as well. For barriers, some of the users believed that the target audience for the RecMap wasn't clear, that sometimes it was overwhelming or had too much information, and that there were sometimes technical difficulties, for example, in the loading time. And in the deliberative dialogue, participants also commented on how overwhelming it was. And one important thing that came up was the potential benefit of AI. In fact, one participant commented that having AI or using AI along with search would be helpful, and that they envisioned that the recommendation related to the question would pop up. And I believe that's where I'm going to stop, and where Justina and Bart will step in. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ashley. Yes, that is a great way to move to our part of the presentation. So as Kirsty mentioned at the very beginning, my name is Justina, and I work as a product manager at Evidence Prime. And now I wanted to show you how we came up with the RecChat idea to support the eCOVID-19 RecMap and the user's interaction with this page. So the eCOVID-19 RecMap was quite a challenging project for us as a company for a few reasons. First of all, since it's a catalog of guidelines on COVID-19, it was during the pandemic an extremely relevant topic, and still remains one, because the post-COVID and long COVID syndromes still remain focus of various health organizations around the world. There was a lot of content to work with. So Ashley mentioned over 10,000 recommendations. That is a lot of content for users to sift through and to find information they're looking for. So you could say it's like the proverbial needle in a haystack. And another challenge is that the RecMap itself can be used by various groups. So we can imagine both patient who has some symptoms and is looking for information what to do with them. You could have even a parent whose child has developed some symptoms, or they just want to learn how to protect their child best. And there could be also a health professional who wants to learn how to best care about their patients. So all of these people will be focused on a bit different bits of information, and they all need to receive it, and preferably as soon as possible, because with the internet and mobile devices being spread all around the world, people are used to getting answers to the questions very quickly. So we wanted to find out how it is, how the website is working for people, how they see it, and that's the user testing that Ashley mentioned. So what it looked like is that a test supervisor from our company was meeting with a tester who had their first interaction with the COVID-19 RecMap at that point. And the supervisor was giving them tasks and questions, and the tester was providing answers and feedback, as well as the supervisor was also observing the behavior of both the tester and the website itself. And from this behavior and from those answers and feedback of the tester, we drew conclusions. And the conclusions were that while all the facilitators that are actually mentioned are true, that people enjoy having it all in one place, and they enjoy having so much of information, this amount of information can be overwhelming. So people mentioned that the search process is really advanced, but they don't know how to use it. And you can see the example of our search instructions on the right-hand side, which we did try to make as understandable as possible, but still they are quite complex because, well, sophisticated and complex mechanism requires a lot of precision in its use. Some people actually felt that there was the piece of information they were looking for, but they just couldn't locate it. And at some point, they were so overwhelmed with information that they actually didn't feel that they are an actual supposed user of this website. So we decided we wanted to help them. And as Ashley mentioned, we were also helped with their feedback, because some people actually mentioned like, oh, this could use some AI in it, because the tests came together with the outburst of AI in the popular media, so people knew that this was an actual tool that could be used. So that's what we wanted to think of. So we knew that to remedy those issues that people mentioned, the solution had to be intuitive. So it had to be simple in use, so that people don't need to go through a lot of instructions. They can just use it like so. It has to be fact-based, because still the information needs to be relevant. Information needs to come from the recommendations on the COVID-19 roadmap. When it comes to health, it has to be fact-based or evidence-based, as all the work that Evidence Prime engages in. The results need to be filtered, so people really emphasized that they could just narrow down their search results to what actually interested them. So we wanted to keep this functionality available, so they can still, even with the use of another tool, of another search, they can still narrow down the results. And also the solution had to be concise. So since, as Ashley mentioned, there were multiple sources, they were drawing the recommendations from multiple guidelines and multiple organizations, it did sometimes happen, and still happens, that many organizations have recommendations on the same topic. So people entered their search and they received like a few or even a dozen of recommendations on the same topic. So we wanted to give them a chance to somehow summarize those results together and have the information available more easily. And the answer to that was RecChat. So as it is, the RecChat is a ChatGPT-like tool. So if you used ChatGPT or a similar AI, you can be familiar with how it works, that you ask it questions and it provides answers, and you can comment on the answers or ask it to respond in a different way if you didn't find what you are looking for in the answer. But it has some very distinct differences from ChatGPT. First of all, it has restricted sources. So ChatGPT draws from whole of the internet, everywhere. When it can find the information that you are asking about, it will give you, regardless of the quality of it. And again, since we are talking about healthcare, this had to be more cautious. So the RecChat is restricted only to eCOVID-19 RecMap as its source of information. It's only looking there. It's not looking anywhere outside of it, because that's what we actually want to be looking for, and not any other information. It had to be precise. So sometimes when you talk to AI like ChatGPT, you are getting answers which are very sophisticated and are reading almost like a book and not like a regular conversation. So this is something we wanted to avoid as well. The answers have to be precise, based strictly on the information found on the COVID-19 RecMap, and not, let's say, polished in any way. And most importantly, like, the answers have to be based on real data. The conversational AI doesn't like to admit it doesn't know something, or it doesn't like to not provide the answers. People, when they're using it, expect that if they are asking, they should obtain the answer, which results in something that's called hallucinations. So if the AI doesn't know the answer to your question, it will make up something. People notice, for example, when they are sometimes asking ChatGPT for sources, they receive links that don't work, and it doesn't mean that the link doesn't work. It means that the link was just made up. This information doesn't exist. So this is something that also we wanted to really avoid, because again, answers are about healthcare, so they have to be real and they cannot be just made up by the machine. So now let's see how it works in practice. So the tool itself is accessible online. You will get access, as Kirsty mentioned, by the end of this webinar. You can just log in with your email address and a password that we will provide you with, and you enter immediately the COVID-19 Rec Chat. So you start at the page where you do all the work, all the searching. But before that, let me just also show you that there's an instruction available for the users, together with a link that takes you to the actual eCOVID-19 Rec Map, so the actual source of all the information and of the great work that was done by Ashley and the rest of the team with the extraction and appraisal and making the evidence available. You can also access history of your previous searches, so whatever you searched for can be found here. And of course, you can just do the search. So let's try to imitate what regular users' interaction with this search and with this search AI could be. So back during the pandemic, one of the very important questions people were asking were, should I vaccinate against COVID? And of course, it's telling us to wait a bit because there's a lot of information to search for. And here we get the answer. Below the answer, you can see the recommendations that this is based on. Those are actual recommendations, just as Ashley mentioned, which were issued by actual organizations. The organizations are listed here. So for example, here is the CDC or the Public Health Agency of Canada. We can see the text of the recommendation that they issued, and what guideline it comes from, as well as the link, the COVID-19 roadmap. So each recommendation we see can take us to the recommendation page on the COVID roadmap, when we can access more details that Ashley mentioned that were provided together with this recommendation. However, this is not compulsory, because what we get and what's most important is, as I mentioned, the concise summary of all the information below, which is generated by the Rec Chat. However, it's not made up. It's always providing sources. So this part comes from the source number 1, this part comes from source number 2, and so on and so forth. So the information, we can always see where it comes from. We can confront it with the content of the recommendations and see that it is real evidence and not hallucinations of AI. And we can also provide feedback, so whether we like the answer or not, so that the machine can learn on it and be better in the future. So here we can see that the recommendations are made, for example, by the CDC and the Health Agency of Canada. And I myself, I don't live in Canada, I live in Europe. So I wanted to see, like, are there, or maybe actually tell it, sure, recommendations for Europe. And this time it is showing me recommendations again on vaccination, because this is still the same conversation. So when I'm asking it to show recommendations for Europe, it knows that I'm not asking for all recommendations regarding COVID-19 for Europe. It's still regarding vaccination. And it shows me recommendations made by European associations, for example, the British HIV Association. So this way I can get evidence which perhaps is more relevant to my case, since it's on the same continent as I live. Ashley also mentioned the quality appraisal, so the agree-to tool, which helps the team decide what was the work done on the guideline and how good it is quality-wise. So I can also ask the chat, show the best quality recommendation recommendation. And these recommendations were selected. As you can see, these are made by WHO, which everyone I believe knows as a well, World Health Organization is a class of its own. And this is also marked, so recommendations which were scored with agree score of 60% or higher are those that are considered a good quality. And even here we can make sure that, yes, all the 3 domains of agree that are assessed to assess the quality are above 60%, which means this is good quality recommendation. I can also narrow down by other types. So for example, here we can see that some of the recommendations are marked as additional guidance. Some are marked as formal recommendation. This is based on the methodology behind it, and that's appraised by the COVID-19 team. And this is something I can access. So I can also ask the machine to show formal recommendations only. And that's what happens. What I see here are only formal recommendations on this very subject. And this can go on and on. I can ask it to give me more recommendations. I can ask it to provide it for various countries and various regions, like I did with Europe. This is all up to the user themselves. So this is something that that can be quite useful and actually, well, makes it easier because I don't have to construct a very specific search term based on the complicated instructions I showed below. I can just talk to the machine and based on its answers, either formulate further questions or leave satisfied with the results. And if I want to have another conversation, another topic, I just need to start a new chat and this one will be saved. Similarly, as here in the history, we can also access previous questions here, so they can also be saved for the future. Now let's pretend to be a clinician. So instead of vaccination, we will ask about, should I treat COVID patients with remdesivir? Also, what is to be marked is that the recommendations here were drawn by various organizations at various stages. If it may happen that you don't, that you see something here on screen that you don't actually agree with, this may be because this was done at an earlier time, or simply that this was done in a different setting. So for now, let's just focus on the tool itself. As we can see, the answer was also provided, and there is no connection to vaccination here, so or at least the fact of getting vaccination. So this is a new conversation. And now for the most important part, as I mentioned, we taught the machine to not look for information outside of the RecMap. So for example, if I ask about a different healthcare related topic, is chemotherapy appropriate for breast cancer? It will take some time. And now the machine is actually admitting it doesn't know, that it cannot provide a definite answer based on recommendation in the COVID-19 database, and that there were no sources here. So this is something that people can actually feel safe with, meaning that what they see here is only based on the actual information drawn from in COVID-19 RecMap. And here, if they ask about a thing or about a drug which is not on the RecMap, they will not receive an answer, so as not to be led astray with non-existent or false data. So this is still quite an early version of the tool. We wanted to get feedback on it from other people. So we presented it on a workshop during the Guidelines International Network Conference this year in Glasgow. And I wanted to share with you the initial results that we got from the attendees of this workshop, starting with the strengths of the tool, which were identified as it is easy to use and consistent. The answers are well structured, and the results are quality appraised and stem from a huge database. So there's a lot of source data, and that the sources are provided. So you see where the information comes from. As for opportunities, well, first and foremost, it's embedding in other apps. While COVID-19 RecMap was selected as our example because it was readily available with already a huge database of recommendations, and there was an actual need for such a solution. That's why we selected it. But ideally, this could be implemented for any repository of guidelines or recommendations, and that can be accessed. So this could be relevant for different diseases or different topics, and the filtering was preserved. So again, the users can narrow down their search results. As for the weaknesses, some people we received some feedback about sources being more diverse. So it did happen that when you ask a question and receive those 3 or 5 recommendations, they were all from the same organization. Why we know that on COVID-19 RecMap there are recommendations from various sources. So this could be diversified, and that's what we to some extent tried to do. As you could see, the recommendations which were shown usually were from various organizations. There was also a comment about ordering recommendations by guideline quality, so by the AGRI score, and at that point, early in the works, the follow-up questions did not always go back to the original question, which again has already been improved. And as for threats, well, first and foremost, it's will people trust it? While at the beginning of the year, everyone was extremely enthusiastic about the AI and ChatGPT and similar tools. Now people are learning that it's not always precise, it's not always true. So will people trust information from such tool? Well, we do try as we can, right? We are narrowing down the sources and providing the references for the results, but still this remains a possible threat. And some people even asked if it adds value over ChatGPT. Potential costs were mentioned as a threat, whether or not the users will actually understand the content that they receive. Still, while this is being summarized by AI, still the content that's summarized are clinical recommendations. So it could happen that the content remains unclear for general audience. And there is the question of conflicting recommendations. So in case of COVID-19 RecMap, as I mentioned, the recommendations come from various organizations, from various places in the world. So it may happen that 2 recommendations regarding the same intervention or the same issue will be conflicting. They will not be exactly the same. And in this case, if a person asks a question to the chat, they can receive 2 differing answers. So this is also something to be remembered. And those were the all comments that we received. And now I would say it's your turn. So as Kirsty mentioned, after the Q&A session, you will receive access. And what we would like you to do is play around with RecChat, ask it questions as I was showing, see through the results if they are as you think they should be, if the tool meets your needs, if it's indeed something that could help search through huge repositories of guidelines and recommendations, and give us your feedback. Together with the access and to the email after the meeting, you will also receive a form that can be filled with your comments, your impressions, your experiences with the tool. And this is something that we will be really grateful for, because, well, this way we can expand the tool, explore it more, and make it better in the future, so that it can be used not only for the COVID-19 RecMap, but also other repositories around the world. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Justina. I'm just going to throw up my presentation here again. So as you were speaking, we did notice that the Q&A functionality is not available at the bottom of the screen, but it seems that that is not hampering you from asking questions within the chat. So thank you so much for that. We'll now go through some of the questions that we have. at the moment. So Justina, you had mentioned that the RecChat solution can be used for another set of guidelines possibly, but could we use RecChat for secure data or confidential research data?
Well, so if I understand correctly, like that would mean if it can be used for internal use, perhaps, because well, I understand since someone gets access to the RecChat, they will also get access to the results of it. So I would say. Arthur will maybe expand on what I will say, but I would say yes, it can be. Even now, the RecChat that we have is restricted for password access, so the data will not spill out.
Yeah, so I actually had a chance to read through these questions as you were presenting, Justina, so I can answer maybe in more detail. So I believe that the question was whether we can use some confidential or internal data sources. And the answer is yes. So to be honest, as Justina said, many of the problems that you will surely discover with RecChat currently comes from the fact that it's based on RecMap, and RecMap is is a source of many diverse views on COVID-19. It's not by any means a single voice, rather recommendations are coming from different organizations, and it also can be the case that they are contradictory. So this is, by the way, one of the problems with this very tool. But the reason why we built RecChat in the very first place is not only to make it simpler to search within RecMap, but also to apply it to data sources beyond eCOVID RecMap. So the idea here is that we can use pretty much any data source, and we can also securely deploy it on premises or within a private cloud. So then you could have some sort of a, let's say, private instance that you use. So I think that this is also not a hypothetical case, but actually one of the RecMaps that we created on top of the eCOVID RecMap was used internally by one of the organizations to see their research output. So it was not a public portal initially, but something that they used to see across all their recommendations. So we can even say that a part of creating like brand new RecChats based on some internal data sources, I can also easily imagine some organizations creating some specific views of the existing RecMap that only contains their recommendations. And this is, of course, also something that is possible.
Okay, great. And you mentioned previously that obviously RecChat is password protected. How else can we ensure that the protected research data can stay secure?
Yeah, so this is a topic that we are trying to discuss during many of our webinars, and these webinars for some reason are not the most popular ones. So I'm very happy that this question was posted. So we, as a company, we are of course a spin-off of a university, so our scientific roots are very strong. But at the same time, the added value that comes from us as a team is that we create products or services that are secure and are meeting software engineering standards that are required by our clients, both from government, academia, and industry. And so to this extent, we are going through many security audits, and our systems are subject to penetration testing. So we have people that are actually trying to break into these systems. So to this extent, we hold FedRAMP certification, which is U.S. government certificate for security of cloud solutions. And we also have ISO 27001 and SOC 2 Type 2 certifications. So I would say that I'm not saying that the presence of all these certificates make your data secure, but rather the processes that we had to implement to obtain these certifications. So I don't want really to make this answer any longer, because I have the evidence that it's not something that is the most interesting thing in the world for many. But at the same time, I also recognize that it is the most important thing for the people that are actually stewards of the data and need to care about such things. So I would be very happy if we could maybe have some sort of a follow-up if you are interested to learn more.
Okay, great, thanks. And is there a way that you can generate output files from the analysis of the data that is used for the analysis? So can RecChat maybe produce like histogram?
So it's not possible at the moment, but of course, it's a very exciting new area for ChatGPT and other solutions that they can also generate code, run code. So in GPT-4, there is a plugin called, or really kind of part of it, which is called Code Interpreter. And it basically is capable of running Python code and generating histograms or other plots based on the data. We don't have this capability yet in RecChat to a large extent because there is not so much quantitative data that we have in the RecMap database. So we could, for instance, try to generate some histograms or, let's say, number of recommendations from given countries or from given organizations that match your query. So I think that would be really great and interesting. But I would really like to learn more about potential use cases, what kind of histograms and so on would be useful. But it seems that with the advent of GPT-4 and the code interpreter, everybody now has the junior data scientists that they could ask to run different data analysis, and we could surely integrate with this somehow and also generate such outputs.
I received a question here. I'm not too sure if it is directed to the RecMap or the RecChat. Does the tool differentiate from a healthcare professional and a patient?
So perhaps I can take that. It's not the tool itself that differentiates. It's the person who is asking the question. From the very phrasing of answers, as I mentioned, it's important for people to get answers like quickly. And really what we hear from many stakeholders is that when it comes to reading, there is not much difference between a parent and a doctor who has really little time to take one patient and give them the answer. So everyone wants to be given a simple answer. However, the question you're asking defines what you are receiving, right? So if you ask about a very specific drug or a very specific type of treatment, then you will get those specific data, and you can even specify them further with follow-up questions. If the question is more simple, just about like, should I get vaccinated or should my kid wear a mask, then the answer will be like comparatively simpler. So it's just adjusting to the person it's speaking to.
Thanks. And Ashley, could you maybe speak about from the RecMap point of view? Is it does it differentiate between the two?
So I guess we tried to cater to all the different audiences: healthcare practitioners, members of the public, policymakers. And a great thing about our plain language recommendations, if you do search for that in the rec map, is that we have a section in our PLR that tells you who this recommendation is for. So you're able to see like who the audience for that recommendation is and if you identify with that audience. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I believe this one is more catered to Rec Chat. If an answer is not appropriate to a region, can the user answer with a link of the guideline in their region?
Yeah, so this is something that is sometimes quite difficult, how to really get the balance right between being precise and being comprehensive. My background and the reason why I'm answering this question perhaps is in computer science, and the field that kind of deals with problems like the RecChat is doing is called information retrieval, and basically the whole science of information retrieval is how to balance sensitivity and specificity, or precision and recall, which is how let's say the measures that are used in this field. And I believe that your question also touched on this a little bit, because sometimes when you ask for recommendations specific for a region, and we are not able to get them either because we don't understand the query, or maybe the recommendations are not tagged with the region, even if maybe they are applicable. Our colleagues tried, of course, to do this comprehensively, but we cannot rule out that sometimes it was not possible to actually find out what was the region. Then what we are trying to do instead is to just get you some recommendations, not necessarily from this region. We are not looking for guidelines, so we will not give you a link to a guideline from a region. But we kind of fall back to giving you recommendations that answer your query, but potentially from different regions. And my short introduction when I started answering about this specificity and sensitivity, or precision and recall, this is really a judgment or a design decision that we made. And when implementing some solution like this for another organization, we can make a different decision. So in this particular case, we decided that we cannot get a recommendation that answers your query precisely from a given region. We are giving you a recommendation from another region, but we could also implement it like you said. So instead, we are giving you a link to a guideline from this region that doesn't necessarily contain recommendation we think you are looking for.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Another question here. If an organization is interested in RecChat, do they first need to develop their own rec map? And do you also have the metrics on usage between the rec map and the chat feature?
So I will maybe answer this one as well. I think that what is really very important when understanding the rec map is that it's not really about the grid and the list of recommendations, but it's about the mapping process. So the rec map is more about the mapping, not about the map. And by mapping, we mean getting all your existing recommendations in such a format that it can be searchable. So here, my colleagues can provide much more details on how actually this tagging and extraction process looked like. But just to give you some idea, you need to very often associate some medical codes with populations interventions that you have in your recommendations, because our experience doing such maps for various organizations is that when you go back to some of the guidelines that were created many years ago, it's not so easy to actually tell what is the intervention population and so on. So how really to map this to the PICO scheme. And doing this mapping, so doing this organization of data and using some sort of a, how we call it, schema or data format that is consistent across all the recommendations, is really key to make RecChat work. So my answer is that you don't need necessarily to create a rec map. So you don't need to create the portal, but some level of creating of the structure needs to be in place for RecChat to work properly.
Great, thank you so much. We're rapidly approaching our end time here, but I just wanted to squeeze in another question. How is the age of recommendations handled? Recommendations for 2020 may not be pertinent in 2023.
Yeah, so this is, I just wanted to get the introduction. It is not handled by RecChat itself. It is handled by the RecMap team. And Ashley, maybe you could tell more about like the process of leaving and updating.
Yeah, exactly. Like we are keeping all the COVID-19 recommendations and guidelines in RecMap, but we are trying to stay up to date with them, which means that we are removing older versions of a recommendation from that organization and replacing it with the latest version from that organization. So it depends on if that organization is publishing in that year. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for questions at the moment. But yes, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. And again, thank you for taking the time to spend this last hour with us.